Hello,
Yes,
check
I can.
1, 2.
Check, 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 check.
I can hear you, Mr. Denley.
Yay!
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right. Hello, everybody. Let us know if you can hear us. We've been working diligently on getting our audio dialed in, and I think we finally got it.
Yes. So if you guys can hear us, please put yes in the chat box. That would be amazing.
Yes.
Thank you for showing up today. Streaming live from our studio in North Dakota. That would be where Steve is.
Yep.
And Southern California. That would be where I am. And hopefully all this technology is going to work so we can provide something awesome for you guys today.
That's right.
All right. So today we were talking about blues soloing. Blues soloing. That's it.
Yep.
See y'all later.
Yeah. If only it were that easy.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we're going to start out here with just a welcome to everybody. Please, guys, put in where you're from. City, state, country, whatever you want to share. That would be awesome. It helps Steve and I get an idea of where everybody is. That's pretty cool. Also want to ask you to just take this minute and just turn off everything that could possibly distract you, like little alerts, your phone, your ringer, all that. Just focus just for like a few minutes that we have here so you can walk away and go, that was a really good use of my time.
Yeah,
that
right.
would be great.
That's right.
Steve and I are here to help you guys. Hopefully get a lot out of it. If you have questions, please put them in the comment box. We hopefully will get to see those and address them. So let's do this, Steve. Blues soloing. Where do we start?
Well, I think the most important thing when it comes to learning to solo on blues is understanding how powerful the minor pentatonic scale actually is.
Okay.
And again, I'm not going to go into huge detail on this, but I just want everybody to understand that what makes the blues so unique versus other styles of music is that oftentimes you're playing a major chord progression, like let's say we're using A major, D major, and E major, which is our 1, 4, 5. And logic would say you'd be using major pentatonic or the major scale over that, but in reality, a lot of times, to get that real blues sound, what we do is we start with a minor pentatonic over a major chord progression, which really doesn't make any logical sense, but when you do it, it sounds cool. So, if you think of that sound, that A major, it just sounds like rock and roll. It sounds like blues when you do that. So,
Absolutely.
that's for me the first place to start. Yep.
Do you have any jam tracks queued up that you might be able to demo that?
Yeah, let me know if this. Let me grab one here. Just tell me if it's too loud on one side or the other here.
Okay. Sweet, dude.
Yeah, so basically what I'm doing is I'm combining different things we're going to talk about in our discussion today, but it's starting with using the minor pentatonic. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use the major pentatonic. You certainly can. But the major pentatonic just isn't as raw by nature than the minor pentatonic is. So that's a good place for anybody to start.
Cool. So what would you say is like the most essential blues, or maybe, I don't know, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here because we didn't rehearse this at all.
That's all right.
What would you say is the most critical element for learning how to play a blues solo for a guitar player?
Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, I would say, to be honest with you, one of the most critical things is learning how to land on the right note at the right time.
Okay.
I mean, that's just in general with most solos is understanding, like, that's why it's so important to know a 12-bar blues and understand the 12-bar blues so you can anticipate when the chord changes are and where the song is going. So in your solo, just again, very, very basic. But if it was playing an A chord or an A7 chord or whatever, and I think about going to the note A, and then it goes to a D, so then I could make my movements to a D. Now, I'm keeping it all straight pentatonic for now until we get to other conversations. And then if it was to go to an E, I could do the same thing. So you can even just hear in that little phrase how you can hear the 5 chord and the 4 chord and the 1 chord. Now, we haven't added any elements that really make it sound bluesy, but that to me is what makes a good solo.
So are you following the root note of each chord? Is that the idea there?
That's the first steps, yes. Eventually you can start learning how to emphasize, other notes like the 3rd or the 5th, or certainly in blues, one of the greatest notes that you can try and learn to emphasize is the dominant 7. It sounds very bluesy, when you do stuff like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So that pentatonic scale that most people know, right? Especially in that first position, there's a note that when you were soloing there, I noticed that you kept throwing in, and maybe that's that blue note. Are we going to get to that?
Yeah, there's actually a number of different notes that I'm going to show you tonight that utilize different kinds of sounds, but as Dan's saying, one of the coolest notes that you can add in is what we refer to as the blues note or the blue note. And basically what you're doing is, if you think about a power chord, the 3rd finger, what you're doing is you're just taking that note and you're moving back 1. We call it the flatted 5, which, don't worry about the technical term of it, but basically what it is an extremely ugly sounding note when you play it against the root, but it sounds really cool when you use it in conjunction with the other notes of the pentatonic. So instead of just playing pentatonic like this, you add that note in between everything.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So that's what we call the blues note or the blue note, just that one little note added to that pentatonic scale. And of course, it can propagate as it goes across the fretboard into the other pentatonic positions. And even in that one, like an octave above there. But super cool. All right. So look, man, no, I don't mean to derail you off of your path here, but
that's all right.
So where do you want to take it from here?
Well, let's just look at some ideas of using that blues note before we go on to anything else. Let's just think about how we could use that a little bit. Yeah. So, for instance, if you've got your guitar handy and you're trying to figure out kind of how to make this stuff sound a little bit bluesier, now, number one, we already talked about how phrasing is really important, learning how to land on the right note at the right time. And, of course, that conversation goes on forever. But what we want to do now is just take this note right here and just think about if you started on, I'm just playing an A minor pentatonic right now. So if I just started on the 7th fret and descended with that blues note, that almost sounds like the ending to a song. Right? So what I like to do is I'll take that blues note and I'll do that little hammer-on pull-off. That's a really easy way of just adding it in, is either sequentially, just playing it up or down, or do a little hammer-on.
Sweet.
Yeah, so that's a really cool way of being able to use that. If you throw it in the next octave, if we think about it, that same note, which in this case is E flat, if we put that on the 8th fret of the 3rd string, then what it does is it takes what I used to play 5 to 7, and now I have my pinky on 8, there's all kinds of cool little hammer-ons and slides that you can do with that one. So they when they're in different positions for me, I play differently. Like down here, it's it's always kind of that hammer-on thing. Where up here, I'll do do a lot of that kind of stuff. My speed licks use that thing a lot, those kinds of things.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is that it? That's all we need to know?
Well, for the blues note, I mean, I would start with that. Obviously, you can take that blues note and play it in other positions, right? But do you want me to go through some licks, or what are you thinking?
Well, I was just wondering, like, okay, how do I incorporate that thing? Just if I'm just playing along, like, how do I know when I can throw that blues note in? Like over any old riff, over particular chords. I mean, if it's a 12-bar blues, I can just grab it and throw it in there.
Well, yeah, and you could throw it in. And it doesn't necessarily need to be blues either. It would just need to be anything where you want to sort of implement a blues rock and roll sound. You're going to use that note. I mean, there are times when I'm playing pop songs or metal songs. You know, I play in a worship band at my church, and some of the songs will be more. Some of them aren't very interesting as far as guitar playing goes, but some of them are. And you know, I always think of songs like "Can't You See," like Marshall Tucker. These typical kind of chord progressions, where it's not really rock and roll per se. It's more of just a pop kind of chord progression. But if I took that right now, I'm actually in the key of. I'm using the chords D, C, G, and D. It's technically in the key of G, but that's a whole other conversation. But you'd probably solo D major over the top. And get all that kind of southern rock thing going. But if I took the minor pentatonic, the D minor pentatonic, and played it over that, then it's going to give me more of like a Guns N' Roses Slash kind of thing. And then that's exactly where I would add in a bluesy kind of sound over the top of that for sure. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I guess the point I want to make, just sure that everybody understands, is that this blue note isn't just restricted to blues.
No, that's right.
So you just said you can use it in metal, you can use it in rock and roll, you can use it in Marshall Tucker Band, whatever. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing about scales in general is you know, we get used to thinking that when we're in major we use major, and when we're in minor we use minor. But there's a whole lot of gray area in there that really makes things sound more authentic when you play. And that's kind of really the point of the guitar course that we're talking about too, is how to add those elements that make things sound more authentically bluesy.
Right. Now, do you go over all of these scales and stuff in this course? Okay.
Yep. What I do, the way I like to teach these sorts of things is to take something as basic as the pentatonic, for instance, and just start learning how to play it, how to make it sound good. You know, as you approach playing it, you know, what kind of techniques to use to actually make it sound fluent when you play, notes to be aware of, things like that. And then what I do is, after we've kind of built that element, then we start adding things for color, like this blue note that we're talking about. The blues note, again, whatever you want to call it, it's not intended to be emphasized. It's not like you're trying to land on it and emphasize it in your solo. It's more something that you're passing over. And here's the thing to remember, is that if you use it all the time, then it's not very colorful anymore. It's just like everything else. So the beauty of the pentatonic is you can always strip things back to a basic form, and then when you use this blues note, all of a sudden it begins to sound more colorful again.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it's like that little, I call it the ear bending quality. It's like, what was that? What was that he just did?
Yeah, that's right.
Super cool. All right, man. Where do you want to go from here?
Well, let's go into a couple other notes. So, again, hopefully you've got your guitar with you, and we can just kind of explore some different things here. Now, these other notes are, again, the same principle where we can land on them. We may not emphasize them, but these are a little bit safer. But they sound really, really colorful. So the first one we're going to talk about is what we refer to as the sixth. Now, we don't need to get into the theory of all this kind of stuff, but I spend a lot of time when I'm soloing, I really love the first three strings. So if you think about the minor pentatonic, I've got 5-7, 5-8, 5-8. Well, now I've got 5-7-8 on this third string because of that blues note. Okay, but let's go to the second string once, where we have 5th fret and 8th fret. The note I'm talking about is on the 7th fret of that second string. Okay, and it's a really nice, sound. And what I want to show you real quick is something super cool that I like to do with this thing. As I add more notes, I have more options of playing more notes together, which is kind of where speed comes from, because the more notes you have on a string, the more you can do in a smaller amount of distance, which is kind of where speed is developed. But instead of thinking of it like that, what I will do is when I add this 7th fret of the 2nd string in, is instead of playing 5, 7, and 8, unless, again, I'm going for kind of a faster thing, what I'll do is I'll drop the 8 and just play the 5 and 7. And then what that means is when I get to the 1st string, I'd have 5 and 8, and I get this kind of sound. And now all of a sudden you notice that it sounds a lot different than it did when I was just going... So if we stop thinking that every time we learn something new, we incorporate it and then we use all of them at the same time, and yes, we can do that. But sometimes what's really cool is if you play something as a substitute or in replacement of something else. So that's how I like to use that 6th that I'm talking about right now. 6th is a theory term, so don't worry about that. I'm not talking about the 6th fret or anything like that. It's a theory term. But... So what I'll do is sometimes I'll play 5 and 7, and then sometimes what I'll do is I'll come out of that and go back to the 8th fret.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's where you start seeing, like, Stevie Ray Vaughan and lots of players like this, where that's what kind of the magic of what they do is not just playing it all together in a speed pattern necessarily, but learning to pick things out at different times. To get more bluesy sounds out of it. Yeah, it's cool.
I really like that. So if you were going to play all the notes in that, just so we can clarify, like, you're dropping out some notes, right, of your scale there.
Yep.
Okay. I'm just trying to give them a picture of, like, if they was like, what notes is he playing, right? What if they played that pentatonic scale? Can you go and add the blues note and then add this other note just so we can see exactly which note you're playing?
Yeah. So if we just took a quick look at this, just a snapshot of the A minor pentatonic, of course, it looks like this. Okay. When we add the blues note in, it looks like this. We're adding in the 6th fret of the 5th string and the 8th fret of the 3rd string. Okay. Now the 6th, there's something I want to explain here before we keep going. The logical mind will tell you that you want to add these notes that we're talking about in all positions on the fretboard, and that's fine. Okay? But what I want you to keep in mind, though, is there's another technique that we're not really going to get into tonight that's really important, and it's called phrasing. And when you add some of these notes in other positions on the guitar, they still work the same, but because they're in a different position of your fingers, they don't necessarily execute with the same effectiveness. And this is something that took me a long time to learn about playing in general, was that just because you learn a note doesn't mean it's going to get the sound or the effect that you're looking for. The trick is learning how to add them at the right time. Let me show you what I mean. If I take this 6th that I was just talking about, which is the 7th fret of the 2nd string, and I put it on the 4th fret of the 4th string, which is the octave, okay, and then I play the scale and I get... That to me doesn't really sound bluesy.
Right.
You see, now that doesn't mean that I couldn't find a way of making it work, because I can, but what I want to teach you is just an easy way, so when you walk away from this lesson with Dan and I, you've got something that's useful right away. So when I add it down here, it sounds more melodic to me. It sounds more like a ballad would use or something like that. So if I skip that lower one right now and add it there... Now again, does it sound bluesy? Maybe a little bit. But where it really comes to life is in that substitution. When I take out the 8th fret and I add the 7th fret. Nice. See, those are the
get
tricks. If there was a trick, that's the trick. It's not just adding it. It's learning how to add it in the right place, and sometimes that means taking something else out.
Yeah. I think the cool part about this, guys, is that this is part of the mystery around blues, I think, is that it just doesn't make theoretical sense.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of ways. Like when I look at that, just because I'm classically trained, I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, why doesn't it sound bluesy down there? But then when you play it, I'm just like, yeah. And then like even why the pentatonic minor works over a bunch of major chords is also like, what? Why does that work?
Well, and that brings up a good point, Dan, and this is for everybody that's watching. In modern music, in the world of what we'll call rock and roll, and you can span this out to wherever you want, there has to be an element of exploration, and there has to be an element of listening. Because if it's just about memorizing scales, and you go out and buy a book and you memorize scales, most people on here would know that it still doesn't sound like music. Just because you've memorized a scale, that isn't where the music comes from.
Right.
The music comes from learning how to manipulate the notes and use certain notes with other notes. Now, how did I learn that? Well, I went to college and I studied music. I did not learn this in college. This is not what we learned in college. Okay? I learned this from practicing with other musicians and playing in bands and traveling and playing live all the time and jamming with people and all these other things. And from lesson material, a book or a video or whatever it might be, a magazine. I was an avid guitar magazine collector when I was younger. And I started learning to pick out certain things that I would hear in songs that I thought sounded really cool. Like I'm showing you right now with this 5/7. The 5/7 on its own isn't very magical, but you add the 5/8 on the first string, and all of a sudden you've got this blues thing. Now, what I like to do, for instance, and if you got your guitar, you can play this. I'm just playing up. Then I'm going to go back to the 7, go back to the 5, so it looks like this. And then I end with a cool blues band. So I get...
Nice.
That sounds like the blues, where if I went like this, it might sound bluesy, especially because of that blues note in there. But if I do it this way, all this bending and stuff, you get authentic blues sounds.
Totally different.
Yeah, it's cool.
Same notes, but totally different attack and everything. Yeah, it's cool, man.
Well, like you think about the boogie stuff, like the, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. So it's not just learning 12-bar blues, which is really important. And Dan and I were talking about this a while ago, where, in my opinion, the more developed you are as a rhythm player, the more dynamic you are as a lead player.
Absolutely.
Because again, as I've been talking about this whole time, I think guys like me growing up, what made you really get into this whole music thing was the experience. It wasn't just the training. It wasn't just, here's a scale and here's some theory. It was, it was getting in there and learning what these people were doing. Like you learn how to play a song and you start trying to figure out how they did what they did or how to make it sound right and all these different things. And like for me, riffs are one of those things that a person should know, learning how to... just learning how to kind of, I call it selling, and I don't mean it financially. I mean learning how to sell it so when somebody hears something, they go, that sounds cool. Like music.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very cool, dude.
Yeah.
So you're going to get all these rhythm elements as well, guys, in this course. I'm just looking over it. You've got on here, of course, the pentatonic minor scale, the blues scale. We talked about adding these different notes that sound bluesy. You've got controlling the strings, the Frankenstein, where people kind of get stuck in this clunky movement, which you and I were talking about this earlier. You want to demo that real quick just so they understand what the Frankenstein is?
Yeah. Like when you're playing, one of the big things that people don't realize, I always tell people that the finesse of guitar playing isn't what's written on the lines. It's actually what's in between the lines. And again, the only way we can really learn that is by practicing and experiencing it. So when you think about watching somebody play, people will say, wow, it looks so easy. It looks so natural when you play or whatever that.
Effortless.
Yeah. And the trick is that you're trying to control the strings so nothing else is ringing out, right, as you play. And if you were on stage or you were jamming with a band and you were really loud, these guys will start screaming at you if you don't touch them or turn off your volume. You get feedback. So learning how to control all these things. And so I talk a lot about control, string control. And one of the things is a technique that I refer to as the Frankenstein, which for me, the Frankenstein is like, if you think about the way Frankenstein walks, he's always doing this, right? His feet are never on the ground at the same time. He's doing this thing, okay?
Right.
Where when a human walks, both feet go down and then one comes off. You stabilize yourself and then the other one comes off. And for me, like moving around within a scale, regardless of the scale that you're learning, that's something that's really important to be able to do, is understand that you're not going... and then all this stuff starts happening, you get all these noises and all this stuff. It's trying to learn how to move comfortably as you move across these strings. And then controlling everything. Like when I play, if I hit a note, there's no time that I'm playing that I'm not touching all 6 strings at all times. Even if you're only hearing one note, I'm always touching all 6 strings. I might be doing it from this hand or these fingers or this hand, but something's always touching those. And so learning how to control those things is half the battle before you ever start worrying about playing licks and things like that.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what did I just see? Oh, just for the folks who don't necessarily know, like kind of what the 12-bar blues is, could you just give us like a short synopsis of it? We already went into this earlier on another webinar that we did, but just so people are like, man, I hear that all the time. What's a 12-bar blues? Maybe we could just demo it real quick. Sure.
Well, a 12-bar blues is a 12-measure sequence that gets repeated over and over and over. So, and it consists of 3 chords. Again, these things morph into a million different things, but in its most basic form, it's just 3 chords that are used over and over and over for 12 measures or 12 bars. Okay. And the nice thing is that when you memorize that, the organization of these 12 measures and the usage of these 3 chords, it's an easy thing for you to memorize. So if you're with somebody else and you're playing rhythm with them or whatever, you can lay down a rhythm that they can solo over. Because like Dan and I were talking about before, one of the hard parts is when you first start getting together with people, you go over to somebody's house or you get together for whatever and you guys are going to jam. And somebody says, well, do you know Nothing Else Matters? And you say, no, but do you know Black Betty? No, I don't know that one. Well, do you know A Whole Lot of Love? No, I don't. And you go back and forth until somebody actually has a song. The nice thing about the blues is it really is a musical language that guitar players use. And the 12-bar blues is the ultimate format for us to get to know each other as musicians. Because I can start playing that 12-measure sequence, and I'll show you what that looks like here. And the cool thing is if you were going to solo over the top of what I'm doing, you already know when I'm going to do the chord changes that I'm going to play.
Right.
Which means the very first thing we talked about was learning how to land on the right notes at the right time. Well, you'd already be able to anticipate that because you'd know when I'm going to play an A or a D or an E chord. So the basic structure of a 12-bar blues, I'm just going to roll through this really quick. If you've got a pencil, you can write this down. But the 12-measure sequence is broken into 3 parts. First part is the 1 chord 4 times, which in this case would be A. The second section is 4-4-1-1, which would be D to A. Sounds like Grease Lightning. And then the last 4 measures are what we refer to as the turnaround, and that's where we introduce the 5 chords. So that goes 5, 4, 1, and then usually goes back to 5 at the end. So it looks like this. 1, 1, 1. Then we go to the 4 chord. Then we go back to the 1, 5, 4, 1. Then we go back to the 5. Here goes my 4. Back to my 1. And so that's how you start
Nice.
building. Yeah, that's how you start building this thing is you know the one is coming. So then you try and go to an A, for instance. And then the 4 chord comes up. So you start making your way to a 4. And then, a 5 chord comes up. So you go to a 5. There's a million ways to do this stuff, but that's certainly the first stages of how to make it sound effective.
Super cool.
Yeah.